Hi, I'm Ellie Shipman. I'm a participatory and visual artist and illustrator, and this is my solo show, Recollection, Regathering Social Practice. This exhibition brings together works from over the last 12 years of my career, alongside a body of new work created during this year of DYCP Arts Council funding. I'd like to take you on a walkthrough to talk about some key themes in the show and highlight some of my favourite works. This first piece is where it all began. This was my degree show work at Chelsea College of Art back in 2011. This work is called Untitled with Art from London, and it is an alternative London souvenir stall which I created in collaboration with lots of different community groups across Southwark, where I was living at the time. I was interested in the notion of transient communities, being part of a transient student community myself at the time, and wanted to work with people to look at the cultural identity of Londoners from people who may or may not have been born in London and look at what London represents itself as. So this souvenir stall features things like postcards, where I worked with a local youth group to walk along London's South Bank with disposable cameras, and their brief was to take photos a tourist wouldn't take photos of. So they came up with all sorts of amazing photos of kind of abstract street crossings and photos of postcards and really different, unusual ideas, which I just loved setting that brief for them. I also did things like the umbrellas with an older person's group, where we were working with the London skyline and asking the older person's group to see what they would draw as their own London skyline. So it was things like their local pub, buses they get, community buildings in the area that they lived in. And then we also made these chicken boxes, one of which is here, with a local horticultural group of students who were outside mainstream education. And we made these seed bombs in the chicken box, where they are chicken legs with herb and salad seeds in them. And yeah, if you've been to South London, it's a common sight to see chicken boxes on the floor. This piece was my very first residency called Play Swap, and it was a residency for 6 months living in a Cambridge University settlement and community centre in Elephant and Castle called Pembroke House. And the brief from the funders were to bring people of different cultural and religious backgrounds together in basically any means, so it was quite an open brief. But I was really particularly interested in people's cultural backgrounds, but I didn't want to ask them where are they from. I felt that would be intrusive. So instead, after a spontaneous visit to the Museum of Childhood, I focused on a play and particularly street games. So I ended up asking people what their favourite street games were. I was also interested in the urban regeneration happening in Southwark at the time. So it really spoke to kind of how people interacted with the urban realm as children, and across generations as well. So I asked people to write these kind of forms of their favourite street games and tell me how to play it. And I collected over 100 street games, which are now housed in the Southwark Local History Archives, and also made this short film with local children, where we interviewed residents on their favourite games from across the whole area. And it was a really powerful project, and one of the first instances where I really developed that process of finding a common question to draw out commonality between people, and that is really at the crux of my social practice. This section is called Participatory Pattern, and this theme in the show is all around bringing together people's hand and people's drawings in the final artworks, and it speaks to three pieces which speak to this. Are the banners here, which were made for Take Apart in Coxside in Plymouth, and the Time Capsule Project, which was a permanent installation in South London, and then also Philwood Fabric, which was a 3-month residency at Knoll West Media Centre in Philwood in Bristol. And what I love about working with pattern is that it can involve so many different people. It's really imaginative. It has this really lovely participatory process where often I'll be hosting workshops with community groups, asking people to draw motifs and icons which represent something significant to them around various different themes that we're working on. And then it also gives me time back in the studio to have kind of processing time, to have design time, and to develop people's own drawings into something really with real impact, which has this kind of collective feeling. So the piece here, Fillwood Fabric, this was done through a 3-month residency with the Knoll West Media Centre. And I was asking people to draw little motifs and icons which represented the past, present and future of Fillwood around the community centre's 80th anniversary. So I made this swatch book of patterns, which were all from drawings from local people. And this was like an open source swatch book where people could actually access the tiles themselves if they wanted to print their own fabric. And it also included instructions on how to make cushions and, kind of apply the fabric to soft furnishings and homeware. The fabric itself was also printed out, in several kind of rolls of it was printed for local residents to use as part of repair cafes and community workshops, which they're working on as well. So I love having a project which has a kind of legacy, which has an ability to be used and reused by the communities that helped create it in the first place. Okay, we will move on to collaboration, which is the next section. So this section is collaborative working. The piece on the floor here and the 2 pieces over there and this one behind me here. And this piece, this section is all around collaborating with others, whether that is working with fabricators or working with universities or archives or museums. I work with researchers very often throughout my practice. I'm particularly interested in turning kind of complex research ideas into easily accessible and visual creative outputs and sculptures. These 2 pieces here, the floor piece is called Injurious Effect, and that was created through a residency with the University of Bristol's Digital Futures Institute, which is their kind of digital innovation hub and research institute. And it was looking at the history of the research institute, their new building, which used to be a Victorian gasworks. So I was particularly interested in notions of innovation, what this new building represents, and this sculpture is modelled on a Wardian case. In the research, the researchers had found that, looking into the research and the history of the gas works, they'd found that in the introduction of gas in domestic settings, people were very fearful of the effects of gas. And the horticulturalists in the early 1900s had proposed people keep their houseplants in a Wardian case, which basically looked like this with glass panels inside, kind of like a terrarium. And I'm interested in this symbol, a Wardian case, which was used across the British Empire to transport plant saplings, taking them out of their native habitats and creating monocultures like tea plantations, etc., around the world. So I'm interested in this symbol as something which protects, but also has potential harmful impacts, and using that as a representation of the building itself, of what can innovation bring and what are the harmful impacts that we should be aware of. The decision machine here is another artwork, and both of these and the wall piece, which is a piece called 24 Hours of Sand, these were all fabricated by Jack Styling, who's a fabricator that I work with quite regularly on big projects. The decision machine itself came from a residency with a cybersecurity researcher, again at the University of Bristol, and he was looking into decision-making in cybersecurity and where human fallibility can come into decision-making processes, which can lead to large complex cyber systems being hacked and interfered with in different ways. Again, I was interested in translating this large complex body of research into a simple question and inviting members of the public and viewers of the piece to ask the machine a question and then crank the handle to find out its answer. I really loved that this piece was created for a data and AI showcase at the M Shed here in Bristol. And I was interested in making a purely mechanical machine for this kind of very digital tech innovative showcase, to kind of go back to the early days of computing and to think about these machines and these kind of really imaginative early mechanical machines, which has led to the digital technology that we have today. This piece, 24 Hours of Sand, is a permanent exhibit at We the Curious, which is Bristol's science centre. This piece came from We the Curious were working with local residents to ask a question which informed different parts of their newly renovated museum. And the question for this section was, who was the first person to see sand? And I proposed this wall of 24 spinning hourglasses, which people can spin themselves. And on each hourglass there are kind of acrylic panels which embed facts and interesting tidbits about the sustainability of sand from a local perspective, from the Avonmouth sand wharves in Bristol, to a global perspective talking about the kind of black market of sand and the illegal dredging and sand mining that goes on around the world. The panels, there are also photos embedded in the tops and bottoms of the hourglasses, which are from the Avonmouth sand wharves, and I interviewed local sand dredgers to inform the facts on this piece as well. The last bit in this section is this work, which is called 100 Years of Housing in Bath. And this piece was working with Bath Record Office. It was commissioned by Creativity Works and funded by Wellcome Trust. And Wellcome were interested in public health and housing, and how housing has these public health impacts, and what information in the archives might allude to public health and housing. I was interested in working with local people to explore the archives, and was partnered with Genesis Trust, who are a charity working with people who have experienced insecure housing, as well as Get Creative, who are an art group that Creativity Works supported. Both groups were invited to a taster session to ask them what they particularly were interested in relation to the archives, as well as any kind of skills and creative interest they wanted to explore through the programme of 12 weeks of workshops. The groups were really interested in maps and architecture. They wanted to do collage. We did poetry and writing. So loads of different ways each week to explore the archive materials. And the archivists at Bath Record Office were fantastic in bringing these different maps and different types of archives, architectural drawings, as well as things particularly around health and housing. So things like resident complaint letters around black mould or antisocial behaviour, and various other things which had impacts on people's health from the kind of 1940s and earlier to present day. But something which really struck us from the archives was that there weren't many resident voices in there, and really the only resident voices came from these complaint letters or from newspaper clippings and things like that. So we were really interested in creating our own archive boxes for each member of the groups we worked with to have their own impact on the archives. And actually, these boxes are now archived in the Record Office, where they are held for posterity. So local voices have been brought back into the archives through their poetry, their reflective writing, collages and drawings, and they're now protected, which is a really lovely legacy for this project. I'll now go on to the final section of the show, which is called Personal Participation. So it begins in this area. So this section was really from this year, where I received Arts Council's DYCP funding, and it was about bringing my own lived experience into the work in a bit more of a kind of personal way. So I was particularly interested in birth and death and new motherhood, and these works all kind of were works where I really was developing more of a studio practice and had time to kind of reflect and not be working on commissions to develop works which were, very much just exploring my own personal experiences. The important thing about this year is that those experiences, making collages and sculptures, have then led to developing participatory projects which bring in my own personal experience a bit more. So that's been a really lovely process to kind of develop this year. So I'll talk about a couple of the works. So these pieces, these sculptural plinths here, is called Held with Volume. And the collage pieces on the wall over there are called the Catalogue Series. And both these works were created as a result of a self-led residency I initiated with a company called Limbs and Things, who are a medical simulated training company, and they make these silicon models to train clinicians, midwives, and doctors around all sorts of different health processes, but I was particularly interested in their midwifery and gynecology products, which you can see on the plinths here. During the residency, I created several collages which were exploring the catalogues of the company and looking at the midwifery training products and how they've changed over the years from the company's inception in the 90s. These products really speak to the medical approach to motherhood around the world, and how different products have come in and out of use over time. I was interested in cutting these out as a kind of quilt pattern, again to speak to this theme of quilts, which has come up a lot in these more recent works, which to me symbolise hidden women's labour and the kind of careful stitches created in a domestic environment through this craft, but also behind closed doors in a medical environment during and after labour. So the pieces, the quilt theme began working with this piece, which is called How Was the Birth? And this is a vintage medical screen whose curtains are replaced with these quilt panels. I was interested in the private and public experiences of birth, as well as the domestic and institutional. And I use this screen as a way to invite people to respond to the question, how was the birth, through a one-word answer through these labels on the back of the screen. This was presented in a couple of public exhibitions to just share and invite people to respond. And the words collected are still on the back of the piece as kind of evidence of this diversity of people's answers, which speak to the kind of nuances and complexities of the birth experience, but also what we keep hidden when we describe our own births, as well as how difficult it is to summarise in one word and how it changes over time, and also with everyone's individual memories of their own birth experience. These words then informed the tablecloth of this artwork, which is called Happy Birthdays. This, as it is in the form now, is the evidence and kind of remnants from a birthday-themed birthday party for mothers and birthing people. I invited a group of 10 mothers to come to this kind of shared party, reflecting on their own birth experience, as I was really struck around the first birthday of my own son that I was having a very kind of strange feeling that I couldn't quite put my finger on. And actually, I think it was remembering the birth, and once the child is born and is turning 1, obviously it becomes all about the child, and the mother doesn't really have that, or the parents don't really have that anniversary to reflect and remember in a kind of, taking a moment to actually reflect on that. So this event invited 10 mothers to come and write a birthday card of support to their birthing self. And I was interested in having a space where mothers would get that time to reflect, but also have a supportive and supported discussion of birth in all its traumas and triumphs, and then to leave this mess as the outcome of these conversations. I also made a placenta-shaped cake to speak to that kind of, what we create and then what is left after birth. And the birthday cards themselves are left on the table anonymously for visitors to this space to read themselves. The mothers were all invited to take a copy of the cards home and seal them and open them on the next birthday of their child or children, as a way to bring that legacy into the project and have that moment to reflect, hopefully, later on. This piece is a pilot for a larger scale version of this work, which I'm hoping to tour and develop in 2024. And it was a really fantastic evening of mothers sharing their own birth experiences, but also having that support, and people really saying that this is a needed thing, which they got great value from. So hopefully that will evolve into a larger scale project next year. And then moving on to the final artwork in the show. This piece is a project that I did which was really exploring grief and my concerns for sustainability and the climate crisis. I moved to Vietnam for a year in 2019 and was particularly concerned with air pollution and the kind of visual symbol of masks, air pollution masks, which pre-pandemic was very unusual for me to see as a Westerner, the kind of normalization of wearing masks. The World Health Organization in 2018 said that around 60,000 people die per year in Vietnam from air pollution-related illnesses. And I was interested in trying to visualize that as these funeral wreaths, which are these kind of traditional wreaths offered at Vietnamese funerals, which are usually made with crepe paper, kind of flowers, and then leaves and real flowers on top of that. I was doing a residency in a village which made these funeral wreaths and was interested in using this symbol as a way to try to kind of highlight the massive deaths from air pollution, which is obviously a completely invisible force. I also made a zine, and I really enjoy making kind of magazines and short booklets for various projects to just try and speak to the process of each project, often to gift back to participants where there's been a participation, or to have as a space for further reflections. This one contains a short essay, as well as a photo series that informed the final artwork here. Speaking of zines and publications, this table holds some evidence and examples of publications and early works. It's always been something I've enjoyed doing, is to make these sort of graphic design cards and maps, vouchers, postcards, booklets, newspapers, all sorts of different things to bring like another dimension to the projects, or use as part of the outreach process. But I really do see this as a very integral part to my practice, and something which, as I said, can be given to participants as a kind of thank you and a gift and evidence for being part of the project. Part of the reason I wanted to do this exhibition was that social practice is so often very kind of difficult to represent. Often it's, a series of workshops or an event or something which is intangible. But these publications really give a sense of solidity to these projects and allow other people to kind of have a glimpse into what the process and how people might have engaged with some of these works. So that's my walkthrough of my solo show, Recollection, Regathering Social Practice. I really hope you've enjoyed hearing a bit more about the different themes in the show and finding out about some of the works. Thank you so much for watching, and do get in touch if you have any questions.